the big issue a lot of people are talking about is Gary Lineker, presenter of Match of the Day, of course, and all the BBC World Cup and Euros coverage. He is, we now know, is going to quit Match of the Day at the end of this season. He's going to carry on presenting FA Cup matches and then the 2026 World Cup coverage, and then that is it. It is over. So why has he gone? Why are they not offering him more money? It looks like he wanted to stay on, but they didn't want to renew his £1.3 million contract. Well, let's talk about this with Roger Bolton. He's a former BBC executive and host of the Beeb Watch podcast. Good morning to you, Roger.
Good morning, Julia.
Lovely to speak to you. Do you think this was always going to be going to happen? Do you think that it was inevitable with all the fuss about with Gary Lineker being in the news often for the wrong reasons, that he was going to eventually leave the BBC? Do you think this is mutual?
I mean, I thought it was inevitable. I'm not sure how mutual it was. I think my impression is that Gary Lineker would have liked to stay on a little longer, perhaps continue doing Match of the Day next season, so it comes to a full stop at the World Cup. But the background to this is two key things. One is the BBC has lost in the last 15 years, according to the Voice of the Listener and Viewer, 40% of its income in real terms, spending power. And it's continuing to make cuts. It's going to continue, the next year or so. So when you're paying a man the amount of money you are like that, it's very difficult to turn to staff and say you're unemployed. So they were going to have to reduce what he got paid very, very, very considerably. The second thing is the social media guidelines. I mean, he broke them. It was embarrassing for the BBC. The BBC is now going to go into its charter renewal. It doesn't want to have to deal with problems with politicians over anything other than its future existence and funding. So you put those two things together.
Just made life easier for him not to be there. I mean, look, he was on 1.3 million of the fees we actually know for presenters, because some of them, of course, are hidden in different ways of paying people. He was the highest paid presenter. I suspect not actually overall the highest paid presenter. But you know what? I mean, he was still is a very, very, very good presenter of football matches. I love watching him on telly. I just think his views are rather ignorant and a bit silly. Although I don't want him to not have his views. It's just that when other people at the BBC, and I know lots of people who work there, are just saying, well, we're not allowed to tweet stuff like that. We'd lose our job. Why is he allowed? Why are the rules specially bent around him? And we know after the time when he did get taken off air and all the other presenters refused to go on to back him up, he extraordinarily was allowed back on air, and it appeared that the social media rules had been bent so that Gary Lineker was allowed to do whatever he wanted.
Well, not in the end. I mean, it was very difficult and embarrassing, but look, the facts are he's going to stop at the end of the season. I think the problem with social media, on the one hand, Gary's got a bigger career. He'll continue. He's got businesses. He's a very successful businessman. Other organisations will, want him. The problem always with the BBC is, do you try and match the market? Or do you say, no, people have got to take a big discount because they're working for the BBC? Yeah. And it's always difficult in between. You obviously believe in the market, but then the BBC's half in and half out the market. Yeah. So how you negotiate this is very difficult.
Well, no, I believe in the market, but the key thing is, and I know this from things like, the after-dinner speaking circuit, which I used to be on, is that, if you're on the BBC, you get offered tons of that work, and I think they're actually making it harder for some of them to do it. But you become a household name. But you become a household name in a different way when you work for the Beeb. That's what a lot of them play on.
Yeah, but on the other hand, people will say they're paying the licence fee, we want the best presenter. I mean, what's happened, if you look at BBC sports coverage over the last few years, it doesn't do cricket anymore, it doesn't do rugby anymore. Yeah. I mean, it's under real pressure. Now, that's fine. In some ways, you should say it's been provided elsewhere, though people will have to pay a lot of money for it. The BBC should concentrate on minority sports, if you like, women's sports and so on, which they do. But soccer, they've always thought we've got to hold on to soccer, whatever happens, and hold on to Match of the Day as much as we can. If we lose that, we are in real trouble. And so against that, can you continue to pay Gary Lineker $1.3 million? Yeah. I mean, let me just say, I think he's a brilliant presenter.
Yeah, that's what I think. That said, there is an element where you can say Des Lynam before him, another brilliant presenter, as we know, much love. He moved to ITV for the big money. Didn't take the audience with him, and that's what's fascinating, is actually people are going to watch Match of the Day if they want to watch Match of the Day, and they don't really care, unless it's someone they absolutely hate, who's presenting it. The fascinating thing is who will be the next presenter, because the BBC is, they're very big on ticking boxes, and another white, straight male they might think is a problem for them, despite the fact that most of the presenters and pundits on football are, funnily enough, white, straight males.
Are you auditioning, Julia, for the job?
I mean, genuinely, I could probably manage 30 seconds of bluffing my way through. My lovely audience has had to put up with 5.5 years when I was on The Breakfast Show doing a sports update every day, trying to make it look like I had a vague idea what I was talking about, only just, I think, vaguely muddled through most days.
Well, there are lots of candidates who can do the job, and they'll do the job very well, whether they have that star appeal. But, I mean, Gary, when he started, was a bit halting, but became brilliant. My suspicion is they'll appoint from probably within. But you never know. They've got a new director of sport, and the people who come in from the outside like to make headline-grabbing appointments, so you can't be sure. Whoever they choose will do a good job, but we'll all miss Gary.
Do you think, though, that the rules on social media and pontificating often about things which clearly Gary Lineker knows very little about, but blatantly criticising the government, I mean, comparing migrant policy to Nazi 1930s Germany, for goodness sake, things like that, do you think that it's going to be very clear now, there are going to be no exceptions, you sign up to the deal, if you want to work at the Beeb, you've got to keep stum on your political views, that's part of the deal?
Well, it depends who you are. If you work for BBC News and Current Affairs, and if you work for the BBC staff, or if you're a permanent employee of the BBC and you're not employed elsewhere, yes. The problem gets difficult when you have people who work for other organisations, and they're going to say, because I appear on the BBC maybe once a week, I can't talk to anybody what I think. It gets very mucky, but certainly this will indicate that if anybody really wants to go on social media and be political, their future may be at risk.
Yeah, very interesting. Roger Bolton, former BBC executive, host of the Beeb Watch podcast. Thank you very much indeed for that. Tom Slater, you know, I've got to be honest. I mean, I'm not a match of the day fan, although I always watch, you know, the World Cup and Euro matches. But you know, I'll watch it whichever. The matches are often on different channels apart from the finals. You know, in which case, you know, you watch it on ITV. It's on ITV. And if you're in the car, you listen on Talk Sport. You know, you watch it. Whereas, is there an element where actually these big name stars don't actually attract the viewers that often people think they do?
I think that's often been proven to be the case. When someone kind of steps down, they think, how are we going to ever recover from this? But if the strength of the brand is strong enough, and it's had several kind of so many dynasties now in terms
what happened
of
to Natasha Kaplinsky, you might ask?
This is the thing, and I think people might be surprised to see how readily he is replaced, but that's not to say that it wasn't, you know, a tremendous run that he had, and it's just a bit of a shame, I suppose, that in so many people's minds he's become associated with just the most sixth formerish bloviating on social media rather than what he's actually very, very good at.
And it is funny when people make I do find it's one of the things that I find hilarious about the BBC, especially, you know, some of these long-standing sort of Radio 2 presenters as well, who bleat on about, oh, I've been working here for 40 years, I can't believe they're getting rid of me. You're 75! Get over yourself, give someone else a chance. I mean, he's been at the BBC for 30, well, he will have been when he leaves in 2026. He's been at the Beeb for 30 years. That's a good run. Most people in this industry don't last that long.
And it's one of those things where also internally you often get the sense whenever there is a scandal or even a kind of pay dispute, or the how much people are earning at the top end comes out into the media as it does every year, where there's a lot of people internally who are facing, you know, cuts, they're having to reapply for their jobs, seeing someone, you know, feeling that they've been hard done by, or people mourning the loss of a presenter who was paid more than, you know, hundreds and hundreds of these people.
The thing is, I don't have an issue with his pay. I actually really don't. He's a star. He was captain of England. I mean, he's still scored the most goals in a World Cup for England. I'm sorry, the guy's got credit. He just knows nothing about politics, but thinks he does. I mean, I'm sure he's a great businessman. I like Walker's crisps.
Another string to his bow.
You know, I've got no issue. My issue with, and I don't mind him. I don't mind ignorant people giving their views on politics. Absolutely. That's part of free speech. That's entitled. What you're not allowed to do is sign a contract with a national organisation that everyone is forced by threat of going to prison to pay for, and then which says you can work for us, but you cannot give your political views. And you sign that contract, you deal with that, and then you don't get to go and break those rules and then go, oh, poor little me, I don't get to have the rules which everyone else at the BBC has to abide by.
And that's another thing that people, I'm sure, feel a hell of a lot of resentment about, as you talked about yourself. But in a way, I do sort of just wish that his legacy would be about what he's really good at rather than all these other things. But
absolutely, hanging around the goal. I'm old enough to know that, that's certainly for sure.